I slipped Megan a 20 before service to say that I'm a good singer. Just 20. Doesn't take much with her. Okay? I'm going to tell you a story, and you're going to probably think I'm a very heartless individual, but I just want you all to know I was in 5th grade at the time. Okay? I was in 5th grade at the time. Nothing good happens when you're in 5th grade. Just kidding. All right, so sitting in an old school auditorium. It was my elementary school. My elementary school was called Winchester, and I was in 5th grade, and it was my school's annual spring concert. And this was like the concert where students who were part of the band or ensembles or the choir would perform in front of parents and siblings and relatives and teachers and classmates. How many of you remember that? Yes, the concert was in the evening and the place was packed. Now, I'm not sure exactly why I went because I wasn't part of the band, I wasn't part of an ensemble, and I sure as heck wasn't part of the choir. Now, I think I might have been there because one of my closest friends played the saxophone. He was also in the choir. And since his parents were going and I had nothing to do, I decided to go with them. The concert was great. My classmates did a great job, and they really took pride in their performance. But there then came this moment towards the end of the concert, when a fellow classmate came walking out on stage with his ginormous baritone horn. How many know what a baritone horn is? How many of you played it? None of you, because you were smart, because it was huge. Okay? Now he came out all by himself, curtains closed, and he was the only person on the stage. And so all eyes were on him. I mean, he was the focal point of the night. So he takes his seat on stage, and he positions this giant instrument, and when the moment came, he started playing. I'm just going to be straight with you. His performance, less than flawless. His performance, the terrible side of me wants to say, it was absolutely brutal. And you're thinking, Mike, you're mean. Listen, I knew it was brutal. Everybody else knew it was brutal. He knew it was brutal. Absolutely brutal. And, quite honestly, I'm not even sure what the song was. None of us could make it out. All I know is that he was an absolute mess trying to find the right keys. Now, most difficult part to watch was you could see him. He was really, really trying so hard. I mean, he knew the song, and he had probably practiced all throughout the school year. But it was an absolute chaotic mess. And for some odd reason, I'm sitting in the stands, I'm sitting in the odd, watching, and I'm hunkering down in my seat because I'm embarrassed for him. I'm not even on the stage, and I'm embarrassed. How many of you have done that? Like, wow, that's terrible. You get all red, and you get hunkered down. Now, what you don't know is that I actually started playing and practicing the same instrument at the same time he began playing. Truth is, I only lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And after 3 weeks, I was done. But my friend, the guy up on stage, he kept practicing, he kept playing, and he made his way on the performance stage. In elementary school, lots of my friends played instruments, and I was one of the only ones that didn't. Violin, saxophone, tuba, flute, clarinet, trombone. Whoever made the trombone very, very interesting. Well, they made that way too hard. Now, I wanted to do the same. I wanted to play an instrument, and I didn't want to do the same for the pure enjoyment of learning to play and all that came with it. I wanted to do the same because I loved the idea of being just as talented so that I could perform with the same awesomeness. But that grand idea faded when I realized I had to do something. Practice. Totally gone when I realized I had to practice. I love the idea, I love the goal, I love the grand performance part of the gig, but I did not want to practice. Let me put it differently. I wanted the destination, but I didn't want the hard, formative journey it was going to take to get there. And so while my friend played up on stage, and as I slid down in my chair, totally embarrassed, because it was awful. One of the things I still can't take away from him, and never can, is that he was actually brave and determined enough to take the journey, and I wasn't. Are y'all tracking? And this is where the ball comes into our court. Like, here's the reality. We've been past the ball. We love grand ideas. We love the end goal. We love the payoff in the end. But 8 or 9 times out of 10, we don't want to go through what it takes to make it happen. We want the destination, but we don't want to take the journey, especially if it's hard, especially if it requires investment, commitment, humility, sacrifice. Thanks sounds wonderful, but I don't want to have to go through all that. But without the journey, there is no destination. Without the journey, there is no destination. Jesus, this provocative, prophetic, first-century Jewish rabbi from this obscure little podunk town, he called people, like Megan said, to simply follow him. No prerequisites, nothing like not clean yourself up, then come. Just come right now and let me show you a different way of life. And this wasn't about, hey, let me just kind of create this entourage of people and you all sit back and watch the show. This wasn't about making people nice Christians. Jesus wasn't interested in starting a new religion. Jesus called people to follow him. No strings attached, no prerequisites, because he wanted to open them up to the grand thing that God was doing in the world. Something so massive, so beautiful, something all of us have always longed for. Jesus called people to follow so he could open them up to the love and grace and mercy of God, so they would live the fullness of life God always intended them to live. A life that is marked by joy and wonder and awe and beauty. A life that is marked by confidence and generosity. A life that is marked by our hearts being open to others. A life of shalom, that Hebrew word that means wholeness. Jesus called people to follow him so he could lead them into that life. Because that life is deeply rooted in the love and mercy, goodness, and faithfulness of God. That is why Jesus called people to follow him. This wasn't about how I can make a nice Christian or a nice churchgoer or a nice religious system. Jesus' main objective was not to try to get us somewhere else way off in the future. Jesus' main objective was about right here, right now, teaching us and empowering us to live the life, the type of life that would carry on into the future. The moment you took your last breath here, that life would continue in the next life where you took your first breath. But here's the rub. For Jesus, the call to follow, the call that extends to all people, all places, all times, to you, to me. The call to watch, learn, listen, open up, beginning to trust. The call to follow Jesus is just as much about the journey as it is about the destination. A creative writer by the name of Charles, love this last name, DeLint. His nickname was Belly Button. I'm just kidding. Charles DeLint wrote this. He said this: the road to the goal does not separate you from the destination. It is essentially a part of it. When it comes to following Jesus, the journey is an irreplaceable part of the destination. Without a journey, there is no destination. Without a destination, there is no journey. We tracking? Look to the person to your left or your right and say, are you tracking? Look to the wall. Are you tracking? The journey is an irreplaceable part of the destination. Now, to get a feel for the journey that God is inviting us to take, we need to get a feel for what God is like himself, something very critical. What I'm about to show you is a masterpiece. Can you see this? This is created by my daughter and I. Masterfully colored. You can see that I was confined to this part. You all thought I did this, but I did this. And I was confined to this space. Now, my daughter, Brooke, would want you to know that this is Jake and the Neverland Pirates. How many of you have seen this? Yes, Jake and the Neverland Pirates. And this is Cubby. She told me this, so she was very serious. This is Cubby. This is Jake. You can't see him. And this is Izzy. There's going to be a quiz. She's going to ask you. Okay? Now, what I love about my daughter, and what I love about all kids, what they have taught me, is that when it comes to coloring, there are no boundaries. Dude, coloring inside the lines, even after they have seen adults and teachers do it time after time, it does not register. Like, I'll sit with my daughter like, hey, I'm coloring inside the lines. You know, I think that you should. No, there is this freedom within kids to go all over the page, even onto the kitchen table. And the best part is when they say, I'm sorry. You can't say you're sorry when you did it on purpose. Holy smoke. Nothing is off limits to kids. And it's in little children and their no boundary approach to coloring that we bump up against something that is very true when it comes to God's ongoing interaction and relationship with us. God is always coloring outside the lines. I mean, does God lead us and guide us? Yes. Is God a God of order? Yes. But if you haven't noticed, God is very, very unconventional. I mean, to our minds, God is unconventionality. That's a word. Unconventionality at its finest. Good luck trying to figure him out. Good luck. Good luck. You look up the word unconventional in the dictionary and you get this definition. Not based on what is normally done. Irregular. Unorthodox. Unusual. Mike Floyd definition of unconventionality. Holy smoke. What is happening? God is totally unconventional. Let me ask you, has there ever been a time when you threw your hands up in the air and you're just like, I have no idea what is happening and why this is happening? Has there ever been a time when you just felt like things were just piling up one after another and it was like you were suffocating? You're like, why do they keep getting harder? How many of you have been there? Yeah. And it's just like when it rains, it pours, and that slogan is very true. I'll just be straight, like I always am, like I've sat in many churches, listened to lots of well-intentioned, nice pastors, great people, great guys and gals. I've read lots of books. And sometimes when I've listened to teachings, I've sat in the audience and inwardly as I'm listening to this teaching about God and about following Jesus, and they're kind of laying it out there for me, I'm literally inside myself, not blurting it out, saying, what world do you live in that is actually true and that is actually how it works? Has anybody been there? No one wants to admit that one. That has been me, and I am your pastor. Scary. Now, greatest thing, God has a wonderful plan and purpose for your life. How many of you heard that? Yep. Do I believe that? Yes, but sometimes that plan is not so wonderful. Like, it is very difficult, and we just have to be honest. We've all had these moments, all of us, when we've thrown our hands in the air and it's just like, I have no idea what is going on and why this is happening. But on the flip side, there have also been moments when you or your family or your friends have faced an extremely impossible situation. Like all the odds were stacked against you, and then something totally out of nowhere, unthought of, unexpected took place that made everything okay, and you had no idea how it happened. And we've all had these moments. God is unconventionality at its finest, and let's be real. Trying to figure out God is like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. It is not going to happen. But in that unnailable Jell-O, in God's unconventionality, intertwined in that is a God who is still wanting to move us forward. It's a God who is moving us into his good purposes, his saving purposes. So you can throw your hands in the air, but inside that unconventionality, God is still doing something profound. You just cannot see it yet, and when you come out the other end, you will, and you'll say, wow, what happened? A brother named C.S. Lewis, he wrote an incredible book called, book of fantasy called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I don't know if you've ever read this. He was a Christian author around the time of World War II in England. And in the book, there's this awesome conversation. Keep in mind, this is fantasy that takes place between one of the main characters, her name is Lucy, and between two beavers. This is fantasy. Okay? So two beavers. So she's having this conversation, and the beavers want to introduce her to the king of Narnia. That is their world. So they want to introduce her to a king, and they tell her the king is a lion, and his name is Aslan. Now, Aslan is essentially the God figure in the story. And here's that awesome conversation between Lucy and the beavers. Lucy asks, is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting him. That you will, said Mrs. Beaver. Then he isn't safe, asked Lucy. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Miss Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he is good. Of course God isn't safe. And if God was safe, he wouldn't be God. Of course God isn't safe, but he is good. And he will move us where he wants to move us. And it will be good. And it will be right. And it may not make sense, but it will. Turn with me to the book of Exodus, chapter 15. I'm going to put the scripture up on the screen as well. Chapter 15, verse 22. We're going to read two passages. When you turn there, I just want you to stop, put your finger there, and look up. Just want to do some background work before we jump in. Exodus chapter 15, verse 22. This is the second book of the scriptures. Understand that Jesus hailed from the Jewish faith tradition, and he was a rabbi. And since he was a rabbi, he knew the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, inside and out. And he, along with every first century Jew, was well aware of the event that took place that marked his people's entire identity. It was called the Exodus. And it wasn't like any old event. This was like the event. And his people commemorated this event every single year. And they commemorated it by having a week-long party, and it was called Passover. Exodus, if you don't know, was this event when God stepped in a seemingly impossible situation. God dropped the hammer on Pharaoh and Egypt's massive empire, and he frees Israel from hundreds of years of brutal slavery. Hundreds of years with the boots of the pharaohs on the back of their necks. Hundreds of years of being beaten down and worked to death. And after God frees Israel and he wipes out Pharaoh's army, God begins to lead his people to the land that he promised them. And these are the stories that come right after God freed his people. Follow along. 15 verse 22 says this: Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. And for 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah. And so the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we going to drink?" Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood. And he threw it into the water, like you do, and the water became sweet. And there the Lord made a decree and a law for them. And there he tested them, and he said, "If you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord, your God, and you do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. Interesting story. Next story, Exodus chapter 16, so just kind of move over to the right a bit. Verse 1 says this: the whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. And in the desert, the whole community was ticked. They grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat, and we ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. And the people are to go each day and gather enough for that day. And in this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. And on the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days. And so Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, in the evening you will know that it is the Lord who brought you out of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us? So if you ever had a problem with me, take it up with them. Kidding. Moses also said, you will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us. You're grumbling against the Lord. Then Moses told Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your ticked offness. And while Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord, the presence of the Lord appearing in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. And when the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. And when the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And then Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. Everybody take a breath. Now, here's where the unconventionality of God comes into play. Because what you're telling me is that God frees them from oppression, from genocide, from death, and he now leads them straight into the deserts. The deserts are the very place where they can die very, very quickly. God has a wonderful plan for your life. He takes them right into the deserts. And if you've ever been or studied around the nation of Israel, that's all it is. He takes them right into the deserts. So they go from brutality, and he takes them right into brutality. What's interesting is that you find out that this isn't just a weekend trip into the desert, like they're not going on vacation. It doesn't just happen for 1 year. They don't just go for 2. It goes for 40 years. It will take them 40 years to reach the destination that God is taking them. And the deserts in and around Israel, they're pretty much unlivable. They are impossible to travel by yourself, let alone hundreds of thousands of people, men, women, and children. The desert is a place of desolation, deprivation. It is confusing. You will get lost. There are bandits that may attack you. It is a place of fear. So God frees his people, and he takes them from brutality, and he takes them straight back into brutality. God frees them from death, and then he takes them straight back into the heart of death. But here's where it comes into focus. He takes them straight into death because the only way they're going to learn to survive is by trusting and relying on him. Because the truth is, desert or no desert, life is only found in God alone. Desert or no desert. One Hebrew scholar says this, check this out. He says it took God 40 days to get Israel out of Egypt. But it took him 40 years to get Egypt out of Israel. You are no longer slaves. You no longer have to work your fingers to the bone. You no longer have to worry if your children are going to make it. You no longer have to worry what you're going to eat or drink or if there's going to be enough. You no longer have to worry about these things. You no longer have to worry if you're going to wake up the next day. You no longer have to worry if your children are going to be all right or if they're going to be in this brutal slavery forever. Some of us, many of us, we've settled. We have settled. We've settled for slavery. We've settled for less than the fullness of God. We've settled for less than the wholeness that God wants to give us. We've settled for less. We've settled for chaos. We've settled for unhealed wounds. We've settled for fear. We've settled for despair. We've settled for heartache. We've settled for this is just the way it is and it's always going to be this way. We love the grand idea. We desperately want the destination, but we are terrified of the journey that Jesus is calling us to. Some of us have never begun the journey. Some of us started taking the journey, but we turned back because it was way too difficult and we just couldn't manage it. Some of us, if we were honest, we are just playing like we're on the journey, but if you would just do a heart assessment, like you're really not. Like this is just something we do on a Sunday. And yet Jesus continues to call out to each and every one of us, follow me. Let me show you a different way. Let me show you a better way. Let me show you a life of wholeness. Let me show you a life of healing. Let me show you a restored life. Let me show you a life that is saved and being healed by the living God. Let me show you a life that is secure and confident in the love and grace and mercy and goodness of God. Follow me. Let's pray.